Picture this. A blazing plain deep in an ancient empire. The air so tense it feels like history's holding its breath. On one side, a young king convinced he carries the blood of the gods. His army? Fierce, unstoppable, fresh off a string of victories. Facing him stands the ruler of the greatest empire the world has ever seen, leading a force so massive it's almost unreal. Both are determined to end the other. This isn't just a battle. It's the clash of legends, where entire empires could fall before sunset. Welcome to Gaugamela, where Alexander the Great and Darius the Third turned war into legend. Before we dive into how one brilliant move changed history forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's next. It was 331 BCE, and tension gripped the ancient world like lightning before a storm. 2 years had passed since the bloody Battle of Issus, when my smaller Macedonian force crushed the Persians on a narrow plain. The defeat was so devastating that Darius III, the mighty king of kings, fled in shame, leaving behind his own family. But one victory wasn't enough for me. I knew an empire isn't dead until its heart stops beating. While Darius hid in Babylon, rebuilding his strength, I tore his empire apart piece by piece. Those 2 years felt almost unreal, more legend than life. At Tyre, the island fortress half a mile offshore, the proud Phoenicians mocked my demand for surrender. No one had ever taken their city by sea. So I decided to change that. For 7 brutal months, my men built a massive stone causeway through open water, battling fire ships and archers the entire time. When it was done, our siege towers rolled to the walls, and Tyre fell in blood and fire. Thousands died. Tens of thousands were enslaved. Proof to the world that no sea or wall could stop me. From there, I swept along the Mediterranean, freeing Syria and Phoenicia, then marching into Egypt. But the Egyptians didn't see a conqueror. They saw a liberator from Persian rule. In Memphis, priests crowned me pharaoh, calling me a living god. I founded a new city on the Nile's mouth, Alexandria, a place meant to outlast me. It would become the beating heart of the Mediterranean world for centuries. Yet even that wasn't enough. I journeyed deep into the Libyan desert, to Siwa, to ask the oracle of Ammonius my true nature. The priest greeted me as the son of a god, confirmation of what I'd always felt. I was more than a king. I was destiny itself. Meanwhile, Darius tried diplomacy. From Babylon, he offered peace, half his empire, everything west of the Euphrates, even his daughter's hand in marriage. He promised enough gold and silver to make me the richest man alive. My general Parmenion, a practical man, was stunned. If I were you, he said, I'd accept. I told him, so would I, if I were Parmenion. That answer said it all. I wasn't after half an empire or a truce. I wasn't bargaining for land. I believed I was meant to unite the world, not share it. There would be no second king. Only me. When word reached Babylon that I'd rejected Darius's peace offer, every trace of diplomacy vanished. The humiliation at Issus, the loss of his family, and now my defiance. It all pushed him past the point of negotiation. He finally understood. This wasn't about land anymore. It was survival. He knew I wouldn't stop until the Persian throne itself was mine and his dynasty erased from history. Determined to save his empire and his honor, Darius began the greatest military buildup the world had ever seen. From the Caspian shores to the mountains of Afghanistan, from India's plains to the edges of Asia, soldiers answered his call. This wasn't another border fight. It was a holy war, led by the King of Kings himself, meant to crush me once and for all. Darius had learned from Issus. There, his numbers had worked against him in the narrow terrain. Not this time. He chose his battlefield carefully, a vast, flat plain near the village of Gaugamela, close to his supply base at Arbela in what's now Iraq. He wanted open ground where his cavalry and sheer numbers could dominate. But he didn't just pick the ground, he remade it. His engineers spent months flattening every bump, clearing rocks and shrubs, turning miles of rough land into a level killing field. It was the perfect stage for his army, stretching as far as the eye could see. An endless sea of soldiers and horses ready to engulf us. The force that gathered at Gaugamela was unlike anything ever seen. Ancient sources speak of nearly 250,000 men, warriors from every corner of the empire. At its center stood the immortals, Darius's elite royal guard, their gold-plated armor shining under the sun. Alongside them fought thousands of seasoned Greek mercenaries, hoplites from Sparta, Athens, and Thebes, some of the only men in the world who could stand against a Macedonian phalanx. But the true spectacle was the army's diversity. It wasn't just Persian, it was a living map of the known world. Bactrian lancers from Central Asia, Scythian horse archers who could fire backward at full gallop, Indian warriors bringing new weapons, and even war elephants. There were Babylonians, Medes, Armenians, Cappadocians, each with their own weapons, armor, and war cries. It was more than an army. It was the heartbeat of a continent, united under one banner to defend their king, their empire, and their way of life. And they'd come for one reason: to wipe my name from history. Within Darius's massive army were units meant to do more than kill. They were built to terrify. Two in particular stood out, designed to break men's minds before their bodies. The first were his scythed chariots, 200 of them, each a 4-horse death machine. These weren't the nimble chariots of old legends. They were heavy, brutal, and built for one purpose: to rip through infantry like harvesters through wheat. Sharp, spinning blades jutted from their wheels at shin height, meant to slice through ranks of men. More spikes thrust forward from the axles, ready to impale anyone left standing. They weren't just weapons, they were theater. Machines meant to turn calm, disciplined soldiers into terrified chaos, leaving the field strewn with limbs and screams. Darius knew that fear could kill faster than steel. And then came the war elephants, 15 towering beasts brought from the far edges of India. Each stood over 10 feet tall, weighing several tons, with a wooden tower strapped to its back. From there, javelin throwers could rain death on anything below. Most of my men had never seen such creatures. To them, these monsters were beyond nature, trumpeting giants that seemed almost divine in their fury. They could crush a man like an insect, often without even realizing it. Darius believed that when those beasts charged, not even my veterans would hold the line. He wanted to drown us in panic, to make us face something that looked less like an army and more like a nightmare come alive. Against Darius's endless army, I had just 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Outnumbered 5-1, any sane commander would have surrendered on the spot. But I wasn't that kind of man, and these weren't ordinary soldiers. To us, the Persians weren't an obstacle, they were the final test. My army was the most skilled and disciplined force the ancient world had ever seen. At its heart stood the Macedonian phalanx, a wall of men wielding 18-foot pikes called sarissas. When they locked shields and leveled their weapons, it became a living wall of steel, impossible to break and deadly long before the enemy could reach us. Guarding their flanks were the hypaspists, elite shield-bearers who could move fast, strike hard, and hold the line wherever it faltered. And then came the hammer of my army, the companion cavalry. These were noblemen, warriors who'd ridden since childhood, and I led them myself. Armed with 12-foot lances and fighting in a wedge formation, they could tear open any enemy line like a blade through cloth. Together, we were a perfect machine, the phalanx as the anvil, my cavalry as the hammer. But our true power wasn't in formation or steel, it was in loyalty. My men weren't mercenaries chasing gold or conscripts driven by fear. They were brothers, bound by years of hardship and victory. We'd marched across deserts and frozen mountains, stormed cities thought untouchable, and faced enemies who didn't even speak our tongue. They followed me not because they had to, but because they believed in me. A king who fought beside them, who knew their names, who bled with them in the dirt. To them, I wasn't just their ruler. I was one of them, chosen by the gods, undefeated, unstoppable. Their faith in me was our sharpest weapon. As the sun bled across the horizon and the shadows stretched long over the plain, we stood ready, vastly outnumbered, but utterly unshaken. As night fell, both armies prepared for the storm to come, and that's where the real difference between us began to show. The battle wouldn't be won only with steel, but with nerves. Across the plain, the Persian camps stretched for miles, glowing like a city of fire. Tens of thousands of torches flickered under the stars while a restless hum filled the air. The chatter of men from 100 lands, the clang of armor, the uneasy cries of elephants. It didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like fear. Darius, haunted by his defeat at Issus, couldn't stop imagining one of my surprise attacks. Paralyzed by that thought, he made a fatal mistake. He ordered his entire army to stand ready all night, weapons in hand, expecting an assault that would never come. So, while 250,000 men shivered in the dark, their eyes fixed on shadows, exhaustion slowly took hold. By sunrise, the greatest army in the world was already half defeated. Our camp couldn't have been more different. It was calm, quiet, the stillness of discipline. My generals, led by Parmenion, saw the Persians' fires and urged me to strike immediately. A night attack, they argued, would plunge that massive, multilingual army into chaos. I listened, then shook my head. I won't steal my victory, I told them. If I attacked in darkness, Darius could claim bad luck, not bad leadership. I wanted the world to see clearly that our triumph came from skill, not chance. I'd face him in daylight, before the eyes of history. Instead, I told my men to eat well and rest. And while Darius kept his weary soldiers standing guard, I finished my plans and went to sleep, deeply, peacefully. So soundly, in fact, that my generals had to wake me at dawn. That calm wasn't arrogance. It was strategy. Word spread through the ranks that their king slept like a man who'd already won. It filled them with an unshakable faith. If I could rest so easily before facing impossible odds, how could they doubt victory? And that belief, that quiet certainty, would prove deadlier than any sword. As dawn broke over the plains of Gaugamela, I gathered my commanders. The air was sharp, silent, perfect for the briefing that would define us all. What I laid out that morning would later be studied for centuries. A plan so bold it bordered on madness. A blend of deception, precision, and controlled chaos. I knew a head-on attack would be suicide. Darius's army could swallow mine whole. So instead of meeting him straight on, I'd fight him sideways. My elite right wing, the companion cavalry, hypaspists, and light infantry, would advance at a sharp diagonal, aiming for the far edge of his line. To him, it would look like I was trying to outflank his massive left wing. That move was bait. I wanted Bessus, his cavalry commander, to react, to pull his men outward and stretch the Persian line thin. If he did, he'd create exactly what I needed. A gap in Darius's formation, one weak point I could exploit. But this maneuver came with a price. As my right pushed forward, my left flank, under Parmenion, would be dangerously exposed. To protect it, I created something new, a defense in depth. Behind my main phalanx, I placed a second angled line, ready to pivot like fortress walls if the Persians tried to surround us. It turned my army into a shape-shifting box, one that could fight in multiple directions at once. Risky? Absolutely. But it gave us flexibility against an enemy that relied on numbers, not strategy. Then there were Darius's scythed chariots. Spinning blades of terror meant to shred our ranks. Standing firm would mean death, so I told my men to do the opposite. Open up. At the last second, they'd part their lines, letting the chariots rush harmlessly through. Behind those gaps, my second line would unleash javelins on the horses and drivers, cutting them down from within the formation. It was a plan built on trust, soldiers defying instinct, holding their ground as death thundered toward them, believing that their training and their king would not fail them. And they did believe. They believed not just in strategy but in me. With my plan set and a final prayer to the gods of Macedon, I mounted Bucephalus, my loyal warhorse, and rode toward destiny. Before me stretched one of the greatest sights the ancient world had ever seen. 47,000 of my men, bronze and steel gleaming in the dawn, moving in perfect silence across the open plain. Ahead lay the Persian host, an ocean of men and horses stretching endlessly to the horizon. We were a single drop of water against a sea. The battle began exactly as I'd envisioned. I gave the signal and led my right wing, the companions, hypaspists, and light infantry, forward in our oblique advance. Instead of charging straight, we drifted sideways, a strange, deliberate glide across the field, like a ship cutting against the wind. The Persians hesitated. They'd expected a frontal clash, not this silent, controlled defiance. From his chariot, Darius watched me lead my best troops off the perfectly leveled ground he'd prepared for his deadly chariots. To him, it looked like I was either retreating or attempting a wide flanking maneuver, one that could roll up his entire army. Panic spread through his ranks. The trap he'd built for me was already falling apart. If I drew him far enough from that flat terrain, his scythed chariots would be useless. And that's when he made his move, the one I'd been waiting for. In a burst of desperation, Darius ordered his Bactrian and Scythian heavy cavalry to charge. They thundered forward, thousands of armored riders slamming into my right flank in a blur of bronze, hooves, and steel. The impact was brutal, chaos and fury on both sides, but it was exactly what I wanted. My best troops had been the bait, and Darius had taken it. His cavalry was now fully committed, drawn away from his center, stretching his battle line thin. He thought he'd contained my advance. But in that moment, just as I'd prayed he would, he'd made the fatal move that would unravel everything. Darius thought my army was locked in place, fixed and focused on the cavalry fight. To him, it was the perfect moment to strike. He raised his hand and gave the signal to unleash his ultimate weapon. Across the plain, horns blared. Then came the sound, the thunder of 200 scythed chariots, charging in a storm of dust and steel. The ground shook beneath their hooves, sunlight flashing off the spinning blades. It must have looked like the end of the world, a wall of death racing straight toward us. Any ordinary army would have broken. That's what Darius counted on. But my men weren't ordinary. They drilled for this moment. They trusted their training and me. As the chariots roared closer, the front lines of the phalanx stood motionless, waiting. Then, at the last heartbeat, a command rippled down the line. The soldiers opened their ranks, creating perfect lanes through their formation. At the same time, they roared, slamming spears and swords against shields, turning the battlefield into a wall of sound. The noise and chaos terrified the horses, who bolted toward the open gaps. The chariots tore harmlessly through the lanes, right into the killing zone. Waiting inside, my second line of infantry and light troops unleashed a storm of javelins. The drivers fell, horses crashed. The deadly machines shattered one after another. In minutes, Darius's greatest weapon was gone. Wrecked chariots and dying horses scattered before our unbroken lines. What was meant to terrify us had only strengthened our resolve. The Persians watched in disbelief as their unstoppable weapon turned to ruin. The balance of fear had shifted, and now it was their turn to doubt. While my phalanx tore through the chariots in the center, disaster brewed on my left flank. There, my second-in-command, Parmenion, was facing the full force of Mazias, the fierce satrap of Babylon. His Persian right wing, packed with Indian and Cappadocian heavy cavalry, smashed into our outnumbered Thessalian horsemen with terrifying power. Parmenion's men fought like lions, but the pressure was crushing. Their lines stretched thin, bending under wave after wave of cavalry assaults. One more push and the Persians could break through, sweeping behind my army, cutting us down from the rear. The fate of everything I'd built hung by a thread. Desperate, Parmenion sent a rider through the chaos to find me, a plea for reinforcements before his flank collapsed entirely. But I wasn't watching the left. My eyes were locked on the center, where Darius himself stood. I trusted Parmenion to hold, to bend, not break. The left could wait, because right then, the opening I'd been waiting for appeared. My oblique advance had worked exactly as planned. Bessus, leading the Persian left, had taken the bait. His cavalry had charged out too far, drawn away from their infantry in the heat of battle. And there, between his scattered horsemen and the center, I saw it. A gap, a corridor straight to Darius's chariot. That tiny space, that heartbeat of vulnerability was everything. My entire plan, every feint, every risk had been leading to this. Parmenion's cries for aid faded behind me. The gods had opened a door, and I was about to ride straight through it. I ignored Parmenion's pleas. Reinforcing the left would only delay the inevitable. The only way to save my army was to strike, not defend. Cut off the head and the body would die. Without hesitation, I made the call that would decide the battle and echo through history. I ordered part of my companion cavalry to break off from the fight on the flank. At the sound of a single trumpet, they rallied to my banner. We turned, not toward the cavalry we'd been battling, but straight at the Persian center, where Darius himself waited. I formed the men into our legendary wedge formation, my royal squadron at the point. 2,000 of the finest horsemen on earth behind me. A living spear of bronze and fury aimed at one target, the King of Kings. I rose in my stirrups, armor slick with dust and blood, raised my 12-foot siston, and pointed it toward the gap, like the finger of vengeance itself. Then I drove Bucephalus forward. We hit the Persian line like a thunderbolt. Their ranks, the royal guards meant to protect Darius, not fight, shattered under the impact. My cavalry's longer lances tore through them before they could even reach us. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. Across the chaos, I saw him, Darius, towering in his golden chariot, watching as his immortals fell one by one. My men hurled javelins. One struck his charioteer dead beside him. Through the dust our eyes met. Me, the young conqueror, burning with divine purpose. Him, the emperor of a dying world, frozen in disbelief. And in that moment, I saw his fear. The King of Kings, undone not by numbers, but by the terror of a single charge. Darius had felt this terror before back at Issus. The memory of that defeat, of me charging straight at him like a storm made flesh, had never left him. And now, seeing it happen again, his courage, the courage of a man who ruled millions, collapsed completely. Certain that capture or death was moments away, he made the choice that would damn his name forever. He ordered his driver to turn the chariot around and fled. He abandoned his army, his empire, and his honor to the dust. The effect was instant and devastating. In ancient war, a king wasn't just a leader, he was the soul of the army. His presence gave purpose. His absence shattered it. When word spread, Darius has fled, it tore through the ranks like wildfire, shouted in a dozen tongues, all carrying the same meaning. The gods have left us. The Persian line began to unravel. The Bactrian cavalry, who'd fought bravely on the left, lost heart. The Greek mercenaries in the center, men who fought for gold, not glory, saw no reason to die for a vanished king. Panic spread faster than any weapon. In moments, discipline was gone. Shields dropped, weapons abandoned. The great imperial host, that endless, shimmering sea of men, dissolved into chaos. Soldiers who had crossed continents now ran for their lives, desperate to escape not just death, but the shame of their king's cowardice. And as Darius vanished into the horizon, so did the Persian Empire's last hope. We were in full pursuit. My companion cavalry and I, hearts pounding, hooves thundering. The chase for Darius was on, and with it, everything I'd ever fought for. One capture, one heartbeat, and the Persian Empire would fall. My father's dream, my destiny, would be complete. Every instinct screamed to ride faster. Victory, glory, immortality, all within reach. But then, through the chaos, a lone rider burst from the smoke. Parmenian's messenger. The news hit like a blade to the chest. Our left flank had collapsed. Mazias and his Persian cavalry had broken through, overrunning the camp, looting the baggage train, and threatening to crush us from behind. Parmenian's message wasn't a plea. It was a cry for survival. In that moment, I stood at the crossroads of glory and duty. I could continue the chase, claim eternal fame, or turn back to save my men. To any conqueror, the choice was obvious. But I wasn't just a conqueror. I was their king. Furious at fate for snatching away my victory, I still didn't hesitate. I reined in Bucephalus, sounded the trumpet, and turned my companions around. We abandoned the pursuit of a fleeing king to save our own. We hit the Persians like a storm. Mazias's horsemen, busy celebrating and pillaging, never saw it coming. My charge slammed into their rear while Parmenian's regrouped forces struck from the front. Trapped between us, their triumph turned to terror. The mighty Persian right wing broke, then shattered, their victory crushed in an instant. I hadn't captured a king that day, but I'd done something greater. I'd saved my army, and with it, my destiny. My counterattack broke the Persian right, and with their center and left already collapsing after Darius's flight, the rout became total. The Battle of Gaugamela was over, but the slaughter had just begun. The Persian army disintegrated into chaos, hundreds of thousands fleeing in panic. I unleashed my forces in pursuit, the Thessalian cavalry cutting through the fleeing ranks like fire through dry grass. The chase raged across the plain until nightfall, a storm of steel and terror. By the time the killing stopped, the road to Arbela was choked with corpses, and the Lycus River ran red with blood. The mightiest army the world had ever seen had ceased to exist. When the sun set over the battlefield, we finally looked upon what remained, and what we'd gained. The Persian camp was a treasure beyond imagining. This wasn't just an army's baggage. It was the traveling treasury of an empire, gold stacked in mountains, silver talents, silks, jeweled armor. Even Darius's own royal chariot, cloak, bow, and shield, abandoned in his flight. The wealth of Persia now lay in the hands of a small army from the mountains of Macedon. Our losses were minimal, barely 100 men, perhaps 1,000 horses, proof of the plan's perfection. The Persians were not so fortunate. Tens of thousands, some say 90,000, fell that day or along the roads of their retreat. Darius escaped with a few loyal guards, vanishing into the mountains of Media. But he was finished, a king without an army, an emperor without an empire. The heart of Persia now lay open before me, waiting to be claimed. After Gaugamela, Darius's authority vanished. Once a king of kings, he became a hunted fugitive, betrayed by the very empire he'd ruled. His satraps no longer saw a leader, only a liability. As I closed in, his cousin Bessus turned on him, binding Darius in golden chains and throwing him into an ox cart. When my vanguard finally caught up, the traitors stabbed their king and left him dying in the dust. It was a tragic end for the ruler of the world's mightiest empire. When I found his body, I felt no triumph, only respect. I covered him with my own royal cloak and later gave him a king's burial in Persepolis, honoring both a fallen rival and my new role as his successor. The Battle of Gaugamela wasn't just a victory, it was the end of an age. The Achaemenid Empire, which had ruled the known world for 2 centuries, was gone. Persia's glory, from Cyrus the Great to Darius III, had fallen in a single day. With the empire shattered, I marched south. The gates of Babylon opened to me not in defiance, but in celebration. As people hailed me as their new king, I honored their gods, restored their leaders, and ruled as one of them, not as a conqueror. From there, I seized the treasuries of Susa and Persepolis, capturing a fortune so vast it would reshape the ancient world. I was now the king of Asia. My tactics at Gaugamela, the oblique advance, the defense in depth, the calculated counter to the scythed chariots, became legend. Commanders for millennia, from Scipio and Caesar to Frederick the Great and Napoleon, would study that field and learn what it meant to turn impossible odds into destiny. But Gaugamela did more than crown a conqueror. It reshaped civilization itself. The victory opened the gates between East and West, blending worlds that had once stood apart. Greek language, art, and philosophy now mingled with Persian science, Babylonian mathematics, and Egyptian astronomy. In the ashes of Persia, a new world was born. A Hellenistic world, united by culture, trade, and knowledge. The dust that settled over Gaugamela buried the old order and gave rise to something far greater. A world connected by ideas, ambition, and the vision of one man who refused to accept limits. The Battle of Gaugamela was more than a victory. It was the ultimate triumph of genius over sheer numbers, of innovation over tradition, of inspired leadership over empty authority. On that field, a 25-year-old king from Macedon, outnumbered 5-1 on ground prepared for his destruction, proved that history isn't written by the largest armies, but by the boldest minds. It was the day I showed that destiny belongs to those brave enough to claim it. Yet my greatest act wasn't the charge or the tactics. It was the moment I chose to turn back, to abandon my pursuit of Darius and save my men. That decision revealed what truly defined me. Not ambition alone, but loyalty. It was the choice that bound my soldiers to me forever. Men who would follow me across deserts, mountains, and into legend, because they knew I would never ask of them what I wouldn't endure myself. That single afternoon changed the course of civilization. It shattered an empire, united East and West, and opened the flow of ideas, art, and knowledge that shaped the world we know today. Gaugamela wasn't just a battle, it was the birth of a new era. A victory so daring and complete that it lifted its architect beyond history and into myth. On that dusty plain, through courage, brilliance, and sacrifice, I became what the world would remember forever. Alexander the Great.